mailbox of...
Hey, what's going on? Just sat down and was getting ready for my waiver wire video. You know, spent a lot of time going through the box scores and catching up on all the information from today. But, you know, just wanted to touch base real quick because I just wanted to say I'm getting really sick and tired of your crap, okay? We're all done with it. We're tired of dealing with it. Quit your shenanigans, all right? So I'm going to say this to you one time. You, 2020. You. What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, our Week 3 waiver wire video, and what may be the most important waiver wire video of the season. Week 2 of the NFL season was a disaster for many reasons, but most importantly, all of the injuries suffered this week. It was insane. I don't ever remember a week where I saw this many injuries, and I had to call 2020 and just give it a piece of my mind real quick. So just trying to scare it so we don't have any more issues like this in the future, because I'll sick swag rich on it next time. But anyway, we're going to be jumping into all of the players that you should be potentially taking a look at this week on your waiver wire. But a couple of things real quick before I start talking about all of these players. Number one, we finally did it, Headliner Nation, 100,000 subscribers here on the Fantasy Headliners. Thank you. Thank you very much. This all happens because of you, because you tune in weekly and you enjoy the content, and we appreciate that. And trust me when I say we're going to keep grinding and putting out even better content for you. So thanks so much for subscribing and sticking around. And number two, if you're needing help with your fantasy lineups, keep in mind that if you go down to the video description, click on Patreon and head over there. If you support in the $10 or $20 tier, you get guaranteed answers to all of your questions as long as you're signed up for that tier. So just keep in mind that if you're looking for some more personalized one-on-one help and you want guaranteed answers to all of your questions, that's the way to go. But enough time, we got to roll forward because we got a lot of players to talk about. So why don't we kick it off first with running backs that you might be targeting on the waiver wire this week. All right, let's kick it off with running backs. The 1 and 2 consensus overall picks, Saquon Barkley, his ACL, and then with CMC, his ankle. Not looking good. Barkley potentially done for the year. CMC, we haven't heard a whole lot on it yet. He's supposed to go for an MRI today, Monday, but we'll know more later on. But also a lot of other injuries as well. Raheem Mostert, also an injury this week. Sounds like it's his MCL. So we need to talk about what running backs we're going to be taking a look at. And let's kick it off with the first person on this list, Jerick McKinnon, his Mostert's teammate. So I kind of went back and forth. You've got Jeff Wilson there, you've got McKinnon, and you've got Tevin Coleman. McKinnon looked to be the best option, though, after Mostert went down with his injury. You know, Tevin Coleman came in, did not look very good on the ground. That was concerning. JMC had 3 carries for 77 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground after the injury. Coleman got a lot more carries, though, but he had 14 carries and only 12 yards. So I thought about this a little bit, and I said to myself, you know what? I could put all 3 of these guys on the list, but I want to make a decision on who, because the last thing I want to do is try and pick up several of these guys and maybe only start one of them when you could be picking up one of these guys and somebody else. So I'm going to go with McKinnon. He is my pick, 15% owned right now. He gets the Giants next week. We could see a lot more of him going in to week 3. So he's going to be my pick from the 49ers. Frank Gore from the New York Jets. They get Indianapolis next week. He's 14% owned. With Frank Gore, Le'Veon Bell obviously still dealing with the injury. Last week, Dalvin Cook went 14-63-1 against Indianapolis, and what was a poor game script. So it even could have been bigger than that had Indianapolis not been out in front of Minnesota so much. So keep an eye on Frank Gore. Not a guy that I'm running to the waiver wire to add, but if you play in deeper leagues and you really need some help at running back, you could have worse options, especially with the matchup that he has coming up. Myles Gaskin from Miami, under 2% owned right now. I talked about him in last week's waiver wire video and said if he continues to see quite a bit of touches both on the ground and through the air, we're going to have to consider him more and more and more. Well, he got 13 total touches against the Bills last week, and that was for 82 total yards, and he gets Jacksonville, a defense that is not going to scare anybody, on Thursday Night Football this week. Myles Gaskin is definitely a guy that you should be considering on your waiver wire. He's one of my top options at the position this week. He's a guy that's getting a lot of volume on the ground and through the air, so if you're in a half PPR or PPR league, he even has more value than that. We could see him quite a bit on Thursday Night Football against Jacksonville. However, my next guy is my Manscaped must-have player of the week, must-add player of the week. Don't forget, we are sponsored by Manscaped here at the Fantasy Headliners. If you head to manscaped.com, you can get 20% off any of their incredible merchandise by using the code word headliners. Use code headliners, all capital letters, 20% off anything from manscaped.com. Now, James Robinson is a guy that I wrote about this offseason back in July. I told fantasy owners that were a part of our Patreon account at that point, keep an eye on James Robinson. If Leonard Fournette leaves at any point in time, this is a guy that could take over the backfield, and he has done just that. Continue to monitor this is what I said last week, but now we are definitely going to add him. You got to get him onto your roster at this point. He has 32 rush attempts for 164 yards over the first 2 games. Now, his first week is a little bit misleading because you look at it overall and it doesn't look like his yards per carry were that great. However, he was doing really well until the fourth quarter. And then last week, he really goes off and is even more efficient. So he is a guy that 100% is going to get quite a bit of volume and can be efficient with that volume. He's not going to help you in the passing game, but if the guy keeps getting 16 total carries a week, that's more than enough for us to put in our flex spot if we're dealing with a lot of injuries. So my Manscaped must-add player this week is James Robinson from Jacksonville. A guy that was talked about a lot this offseason, Darrell Henderson. Darrell Henderson and Cam Akers were kind of the 1 and 2 in terms of fantasy owners wanting to grab those guys and put them on their team. Well, Darrell Henderson tweaks an injury right before the season begins. Cam Akers and Malcolm Brown are the guys really moving forward in that, but Brown had a finger issue. He left the game early last week. Akers has a rib issue. He left the game early last week. They're both banged up right now. Henderson's only 32% owned, and he had 14 touches for 121 total yards against Philadelphia last week. The Buffalo matchup is not the best. The Rams are probably going to have to throw the football quite a bit, but the good thing about the Rams is they're spreading teams out more. And I talked about that on my tight end show this past week because I talked about Tyler Higbee a little bit in depth and why I'm starting to like Higbee a little bit more after I was kind of off the bandwagon this season. Van Jefferson has really stepped up, and that's allowed them to spread out and go back to 3 wide receiver sets instead of running as much 12 personnel as we thought that they were going to. That's good for the offense as a whole, and when the offense is more spread out, that means more room for Darrell Henderson Jr., so he's another guy to keep an eye on. Dion Lewis from the New York Giants, only 0.2% owned right now, going up against San Francisco this week. That San Francisco line is banged up, so that could be good for him. It sounds like Barkley's going to be done for the year. I'm only looking at Dion Lewis in PPR leagues. Anything other than that, I'm not really going towards, because there was only 3 players on the Giants depth chart at running back. Dion Lewis, Wayne Gallman, and Barkley. They're going to be adding somebody. Wayne Gallman was a guy last year when Barkley got hurt. We said, probably not rushing to add him. And then he ended up having a big week after Barkley went down. So Dion Lewis is going to be my pick here because of his work in the passing game. But the problem with that is if they do add somebody else, like a guy I'll mention here in a second, and if they have a lot of targets going elsewhere, Darius Slayton, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, if he ends up being okay, he was a little bit banged up. And of course, Evan Ingram, that might not leave Dion Lewis with a lot of attention coming up soon. But like I said, if you're in like a 14-team league, a 16-team league, if you're in leagues with a lot of deep rosters, he might be out there. If you're looking for some depth, especially if you had Barkley, you can go ahead and get him. Mike Davis from Carolina, 0% owned right now, going up against the Chargers this week. Again, CMC left the game early with that ankle injury. He's going to be getting an MRI. We're going to hear more about that. As of this recording, we haven't heard anything specific. But if CMC is limited at all in week 2, maybe Mike Davis helps make a little bit of an impact in the passing game. 8 targets, 8 receptions, 74 yards in the game after CMC left. So Mike Davis is definitely a guy, again, PPR, half PPR leagues. If you're looking for some depth, if you need to add somebody, if you're the CMC owner, grab Mike Davis this week, especially, even if you grab one of these other guys, if you're the CMC owner, add Mike Davis as well, just in case if we get closer to week 3 and they're like, CMC is just not going to be able to go, then Mike Davis you can go ahead and toss out there. Joshua Kelly from the Chargers, 7.5% owned. He's getting plenty of work with Austin Eckler. Those two are working really well right now. When Justin Herbert came in the game this week, even though he made a really bad decision at one point, overall, after the first couple of drives, when his throws were a little bit errant, maybe off target, he looked really good. You know, them saying that if Tyrod Taylor is healthy next week, they're going to go ahead and roll with him. Don't do that. Okay, we shouldn't be going back and forth at this point. I thought Tyrod Taylor was going to do just fine. At this point, Justin Herbert stepped in. He looked pretty good against Kansas City. Keep rolling with him against Carolina. There's no reason to switch it up. Now that he's stepped in and he's looked good, let him keep going out there at this point. Don't keep going back and forth. That's not good for his development. Kelly, like I said, plenty of work with Eckler splitting some of those. Last week, he had 25 total touches for 113 total yards against Kansas City. He could see plenty of carries again this week against Carolina. If the Chargers can get out in front and really control the game, Carolina is probably going to be trying to play catch up, which means Chargers, hold on to the ball, run it with Kelly. He could see, again, around 20 carries against an offensive line that is not as good, or excuse me, a defensive line that is not as good as Kansas City, which means Kelly could be in for a decent week next week. So keep an eye on him as well. And then Devonta Freeman is someone that I'll be trying to add in some leagues. Only 2.2% owned right now. I would have to assume that he is going to wind up somewhere this week. The Giants are a great landing spot. 49ers, who knows? Maybe they'll jump in. Devonta Freeman and Kyle Shanahan, obviously, they have a little bit of a history together. Maybe they try to bring in Devonta Freeman if Mostert's going to be out for a while. Whatever it may be, he's been visiting with some teams. I think he's going to land somewhere soon. So if you put in a waiver wire claim for him right now, you can grab him a little bit early before he signs somewhere. And if he signs somewhere that you don't like, just go ahead and drop him back. But if he were to sign for like the New York Giants, then at that point, he's a guy you're holding on to because he immediately becomes the starter in that offense. Those are my running backs we need to be taking a look at, but we have a lot of wide receivers as well, so let's take a look at them. All right, moving on to wide receiver now. Again, injuries hitting all over the place this week, so we're probably going to be looking at a lot of wide receivers. I got 9 of them we're going to be keeping an eye on this week, starting with Isaiah Ford from Miami, 0% owned, so he's not even owned in any leagues right now, going up against Jacksonville. Devontae Parker continues to have a little bit of a hamstring issue on and off the field again this past week, and Isaiah Ford against the Bills, 9 targets, 7 receptions for 76 yards. That's a tough defense to go up against, and more than likely Jacksonville and Miami probably going to have to go back and forth a little bit. Kind of a sloppy game on Thursday Night Football. That happens from time to time. A short week for Parker, so if Parker really can't get out there and be 100%, Isaiah Ford is a guy that could definitely step up this week, and you could potentially get him for free because a whole lot of people might not even be paying attention to him because Preston Williams has always been viewed as that wide receiver 2 on that team, so people will be looking at him a little bit more this week. Obviously, Mike Gesicki is another guy people are looking at as well. He had a big week this past week. Isaiah Ford kind of going under the radar right now. You can probably get him pretty cheap, especially if you have a late waiver wire. So even if you go out there and put a late addition for him, you might still be able to get him because many people might not be paying attention. A guy I brought up last week from Jacksonville, Keelan Cole, only 0.2% owned. Right now, this season, he has 12 targets, 11 receptions, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He has a touchdown in each of the last 2 weeks. Keep in mind, him this coming week, Miami, Byron Jones going down with an injury. So Keelan Cole, DJ Chark and him, they both seem to be able to live together. Chark kind of the number 1 in that offense. Everyone was looking at D.D. Westbrook not being a guy that would be able to keep up. Leonard Fournette, when he left, where are those targets going to go? Keelan Cole, who was a breakout for a lot of people last year, including myself, all of a sudden he's regained some of that magic that he found in the 2018 season. So I definitely think with him only being 0.2% owned, he could be a guy that is a threat to take it to the end zone every single week. He is a deep play guy. Right now he's on pace for 16 touchdowns. No, I'm kidding. That's not going to happen. But anyway, Keelan Cole is a guy I really liked last year. So again, just like Isaiah Ford, another guy kind of going under the radar right now that you can probably get cheap in fab money, or if you have a late waiver edition, you can probably use it and still get your hands on Keelan Cole. What about Adam Humphries from Tennessee? Everyone's looking at Corey Davis, right? A.J. Brown goes down with that injury, but no one really talked about Adam Humphries that much as kind of being a go-to for Ryan Tannehill. And Ryan Tannehill found him quite a bit this past week through the first 2 games of the year. 11 receptions on 13 targets and 95 receiving yards. Again, everyone's kind of rushing to Corey Davis right now, but in a PPR league going up against Minnesota this coming week, he could be a guy that definitely you could play and you could use. Now, he's not going to have a really high ceiling, but if he sees anywhere between 7 and 8 targets and hauls in, a majority of those, puts up anywhere between 60 and 70 yards, maybe finds the end zone, that's not bad. And Minnesota, I really liked Paris Campbell last week against Minnesota. Paris Campbell, unfortunately, having that knee injury to begin the game, and we didn't get to see it, but definitely thought him working out of the slot could burn Minnesota because the Packers were able to burn Minnesota the first game of the season out of the slot. So Adam Humphries working in the slot this week, he could put up some decent numbers as well. Adam Humphries, though, again, a PPR play, nice floor, but he's not going to have nearly as high as a ceiling as some of these other guys, like Russell Gage. Russell Gage continuing to make him a name for himself, even when you've got Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley there. Russell Gage getting plenty of work, 18.4% owned, going up against Chicago this week. He has 21 targets in 2 games. And one thing to keep in mind, not necessarily the Chicago defense that we're looking at, it's the Atlanta defense that we're looking at because they suck. The Atlanta defense is awful right now. They can't stop anybody. They're going to be throwing it quite a bit. That's why Russell Gage has been able to have so many targets so far this season. And if you're dealing with a lot of injuries right now and you just need some help, you could do a lot worse than Russell Gage. Why not put a guy in your flex that's going to see a decent amount of targets? You know what? If you own Julio Jones or you own Calvin Ridley, I'm okay with you putting Gage and one of those 2 guys in there. Now, if for some reason you own Jones and Ridley, don't pick up Gage and play all 3 of them. I wouldn't do that against Chicago. However, again, if he's getting a lot of volume, if he's getting a lot of targets, why not toss him in? It could be a lot worse. Golden Tate from the New York Giants, a guy that we talked about a lot to begin the season, thought he was going to be a late round guy that could really help your team out, dealt with an injury. His ownership percentage has dropped all the way down to 14.6%. Going up against San Francisco, we're going to talk about Daniel Jones going up against San Francisco in a few minutes, so we'll bring that up then again at this point. But going up against San Francisco at this point, Sterling Shepard did have an injury this past week. Haven't heard much else on it at this point, so is he going to be limited at all this week? We got to keep an eye on that. So Tate could be a nice PPR play against a banged up San Francisco team next week. So again, kind of PPR, half PPR thought there. Tate's a guy that maybe doesn't have a great ceiling because of Slayton and Ingram, but again, you just lost Barkley. So a lot of the targets that were going towards Barkley, maybe you can funnel some of those out to Golden Tate now. So continue to keep an eye on him. Chase Claypool from Pittsburgh, 2% owned. Really, for me, he's a boomer bust. Made a really nice play week 1, but other than that, not a whole lot from him. Week 2, 3 of 3 for 81 and a touchdown. Other than that, not a whole lot from him. There was that one big play. So to me, Chase Claypool, if we're looking to add him, again, a little bit of deeper leagues, maybe a league where you give bonuses for big plays and things like that, he's probably going to continue to be that guy because Juju and Deontay Johnson are going to be the guys that get a lot of the volume. Claypool's going to be the guy that maybe he comes up with that big play every once in a while. So that's what I'm kind of looking at Claypool as right now. So can you add him right now? Yeah, absolutely. Again, basically everybody's up for discussion right now because of all the injuries. But again, if you grab Claypool and you plan on starting him against Houston, just know you could get 3 points, you could get 20 points. He's probably not going to get a lot of targets, probably not going to get a lot of yards or get a lot of receptions, but he could take one to the house from anywhere. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on. at that point. KJ Hamler from Denver, Sutton and Judy both are banged up with injuries going up against Tampa Bay this week. That Tampa Bay offense rolling a little bit better this week. Brady getting a little bit more comfortable. The weapons getting a little bit more comfortable. Chris Godwin, I will expect, will be back. So that Tampa Bay defense is going to run a little bit with Denver. Denver's probably going to have to throw it a little bit. Keep in mind, though, Drew Lock is going to be out for like 2 to 6 weeks is what I'm hearing right now. So Driscoll's going to be the guy there for the time being. KJ Hamler, if he has to be that wide receiver one. I don't really love the upside, but again, right now we're kind of in emergency mode. If we've got guys that could be the number one target, we need to be keeping an eye on them. From Green Bay, 2 guys from Green Bay, Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Allen Lazard. Why are we talking about both of these guys? Because Davante Adams might be dealing with a hamstring issue. Valdes-Scantling, 9.5% owned. Lazard, 18% owned. Going up against New Orleans next week, so expect a shootout. A lot of back and forth. If Davante Adams misses any time, what we're looking at this point, MVS having that higher upside, that big playability, taking it to the house from anywhere on the field. Allen Lazard being a little bit safer, maybe seeing a little bit more of the volume, more receptions, more yards, but not necessarily that big play touchdown upside. Now, also, though, if Davante Adams ends up coming back, these are both still guys to keep an eye on, because I think as much as they're going to have to throw the ball and as much as they've thrown the ball already this year, both of these guys can be guys that have good weeks for you. I don't really want to play both of them if I don't have to. If Adams is in, I don't really want to start either of these guys over the other ones, but they have decent upside and could bring you some decent potential. So those are the wide receivers that we've got on the waiver wire watch this week. But what about the tight ends? Let's hop over and look at some of them. San Francisco continues to be decimated with injuries on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Luckily, they got Brandon Ayuk back this past week, but they lost George Kittle for the week. Will Kittle end up being ready to go for week 3? Jordan Reed is a guy that I said we're going to start him last week if George Kittle is out. And if you had to do it, you got 2 touchdowns from Jordan Reed. So in a week where everybody was being injured, we saw a healthy Jordan Reed go out and dominate. It's like 2005 all over again. No, I'm kidding. It's definitely not that long since he's played. Definitely exaggerating at that point. But Jordan Reed, 13.7% owned, and he goes up against the Giants. They've been decimated with injuries, and even if George Kittle comes back, do we see some 2 tight end sets? If Reed is healthy and he's playing well, do we get him out there? Jimmy Garoppolo, he was hurt. Is Mullins going to be out there this week, or is Garoppolo going to be back? I don't know at this point. Mullins is a guy that definitely could be targeting the tight ends a little bit more. So Jordan Reed is a guy to keep on the radar as a potential play at tight end this week. Drew Sample from Cincinnati, 0.1% owned. Now, CJ Who's Your Mama was not, a guy that I was willing to play too often to begin this year. However, CJ Who's Your Mama and Joe Burrow had a pretty decent connection the first couple of weeks of the season. In fact, between CJU and Sample last week, they combined for 15 targets, 11 receptions, 87 yards, and a touchdown. Joe Burrow likes his tight ends there. They're going to keep playing these tight ends. Drew Sample only 0.1% owned. You can definitely pick him up. CJU is the guy that had the touchdown before he ended up going out with the injury. But Sample could also be a guy that scores this week against Philadelphia. So if Burrow continues to throw the ball 675 times per game, there's always going to be targets for Sample to get some work in. Mo Alley-Cox, probably the guy that I am most wanting to add this week outside of the next guy who shouldn't even be available on any waiver wires at this point. Mo Alley-Cox, 0.1% owned, a late scratch of Jack Mother and Doyle late in the week. So Mo Alley-Cox steps up. Paris Campbell ends up going down with the injury. Michael Pittman Jr. has been banged up, but he ended up playing. He goes 6'5", 111 with no Doyle. So he busted out big time last week. He gets the Jets this week, who don't have a defense that can stop anybody in the entire world. Expect another big week from Mo Alley-Cox if there's no Jack Doyle. Again, Brashard Perryman at this point, not Brashard Perryman, my bad. Paris Campbell. If Paris Campbell is out, then at that point, Paris Campbell, those targets are going to have to go elsewhere. And they seem to go to MAC this week. That's what we're going to call him. We're going to call him Mac from now on. With Jonnu Smith, I don't know why he's still available. He shouldn't be, but apparently he's only owned in 47.8% of leagues. Why? Okay, here's the thing though. If you're a part of Headliner Nation, he's not available in your league, because if he has been, you've already picked him up, because I've been telling you for months now, Jonnu Smith was the breakout tight end this year. So if he is still out there for some reason, just go add him and get it over with. You need to. Dalton Schultz, 0.2% owned, had a good game this past week. Absolutely. Definitely was in there with quite a bit of targets. I don't trust it though. I still don't trust it, because if he's getting volume every single week, it means Gallup, Lamb, or Cooper isn't eating. This week, Cooper and Cooper and Lamb did just fine. Schultz kind of coming in behind him like that. But again, it was against an Atlanta secondary that's not very good. So next week, going up against Seattle, a secondary that is very good, that has Jamal Adams, that can probably keep an eye on Dalton Schultz and keep him from doing anything. Not my favorite, but I still wanted to bring him up because I figured it was going to come up this week because of his performance against Atlanta. And then Logan Thomas, I've talked about him last week, still only 4.4% owned, going up against Cleveland, who again allowed a huge game to both CJU and Drew Sample, who I talked about already. Going up against Cleveland next week, he has 17 targets through 2 games, and he's kind of dominating that target share right now. Yes, Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver 1 there, but Logan Thomas is getting quite a bit of targets. So he's definitely a guy that you can add and stream this week. He's going to be a start for me in my start and sit show this week, because it's going up against Cleveland, whose defense allowed the Cincinnati tight ends to run all over them last week. So there you have it. My running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. But what about some streaming options? Do you need to stream a quarterback or a defense? Well, let's talk about some quarterbacks that you can stream in week 3 first. Number 1 is the Mitch Magic Man himself, Mitchell Trubisky. I don't know where this guy came from, but apparently he's playing like a real NFL quarterback all of a sudden. And this week he gets an Atlanta defense that's allowing over 30 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and allowed Dak Prescott, I think 4 total touchdowns last week, 3 on the ground and 1 through the air, over 400 yards passing. Atlanta can't stop anybody. They're probably not going to be able to stop Mitchell Trubisky, Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller, and the gang there. So he is a great guy to stream this week if you're needing to get through this week with a streamer for any reason whatsoever. Ryan Tannehill from Tennessee, 40.7% owned, going up against Minnesota, who's allowing over 25 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. No A.J. Brown last week? No problem. He did just fine. He looked good last week. Looked a lot better than I expected with no A.J. Brown. So another guy that you can roll with. Now, Minnesota did do a lot better against Phillip Rivers this week than they did against Aaron Rodgers in week 1, but Phillip Rivers still had a good week. So Ryan Tannehill can probably have a good week as well. So he's another guy that you can stream, a little bit more owned. Daniel Jones, owned in over 50% of leagues. And typically, for you to make this show, you can't be owned in over 50% of leagues. However, I decided to throw this one out as a third option as well, because they're going up against San Francisco, who just lost Bosa and Thomas on the defensive line. So he could have a lot more time to throw. And when you give a lot of time to throw and you have weapons like Evan Ingram, Golden Tate, possibly Sterling Shepard if he's back this week, and of course, Darius Slayton, Richard Sherman obviously hurt as well too, they could end up having a field day. So Daniel Jones could have a big week in week 3 against San Francisco. Keep an eye on that matchup. If you need to stream anybody, Daniel Jones could be that guy, because he might not face a lot of pressure and he might see a lot of open receivers. But I've got 3 defenses as well. So what 3 defenses can you also stream in week 3? First up, it's the Indianapolis Colts. Why? Because you stream any defense against the New York Jets, who are a total dumpster fire, because Adam Gase is not a good head coach and should not have a job in the NFL. There are a lot more qualified candidates that should have a job over him. Why he continues to get jobs, I have no idea. He should be fired. But start a defense against his offense, because why? They are not that good. So roll them out there. The Titans at 28.3% owned, going up against Minnesota. Cousins in the offense looked horrible this week. At one point, he had a 0 passer rating. That's how bad Kirk Cousins was this past week. I was 1 week off on that Adam Thielen sit. I had him as a sit a couple of weeks ago. Got a lot of crap for it. He produced. Started him this week. He sucked. you know, that's what happens, right? That's how it happens sometimes. Anyway, they just looked off this past week. They didn't look very good. Are they going to be able to get back forward and be able to get the ball moved around a little bit more? That Titans defense is no joke. You gotta take them serious when you go in. They fly under the radar a lot. However, this is a team that can get after Cousins, get past that offensive line. They could be a good streaming option for some sacks and some turnovers this week. And then the Dolphins, kind of a risky play here. Okay, if you're feeling a little froggy, okay, if you're feeling you know, want to get a little crazy this week, maybe you can run with the Dolphins against Jacksonville. It's a Thursday night game, right? And Thursday night games, they always present some challenges. Well, Jacksonville's in the bottom third of total offense so far this season, so Miami could get themselves some turnovers this week. They could, you know, hold the yardage down a little bit. Gardner Minshew playing really well, not really a threat to turn over the ball too much. But again, if you're feeling a little froggy this week and you want to get a little crazy, maybe there's a lot of defenses owned in your league and these other options aren't available, the Dolphins may not be a bad team on Thursday Night Football against Jacksonville. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Tons of options for you this week. I tried to cover as many players as I possibly could, as many options as I could, because again, this is going to be one of the most important waiver wire runs of the season with all the injuries that we have had. And that's why we tell everybody, you don't win your league at your draft. You win your league in the regular season with moves like these. So just pay attention this week. Suck in all this information. Breathe it in, take all of it in this week, and get ready to run your waiver wires, put your fab money out there, whatever it may be. This is the week to do it, okay? Don't hold back, go get some guys. If your roster needs a little bit of a makeover, do it this week. Don't wait any longer, especially if you're 0-2, okay? We can't wait any bit longer. We gotta start rolling. We gotta get some of these guys and hope they inject a little bit of life into our team. As always, Headliner Nation, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button, become part of one of the largest fantasy channels on YouTube, the second largest independently owned fantasy channel here on YouTube, over 100,000 subscribers. Again, thank you so much for subscribing. This is absolutely amazing. We spent a majority of the day on Sunday celebrating this until all the injuries happened and dampened the mood quite a bit. Also, do me a favor, if you appreciate the information, hit that like button. And if you have questions about anybody else that you're thinking about adding this week, leave them in the comments below. I'll get to as many as I possibly can, but keep in mind, if you're wanting guaranteed answers to any of your questions, hit us up on Patreon at the link below. $10 a month, you get access to all of our exclusive content, and you get to ask us as many questions as you want with guaranteed responses for Jake or myself. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.